For more information about investing, you may order the NBR Video Library of Personal Finance by calling 1-800-535-5864. This program is available in either the VHS or DVD formats.
We are PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of Nightly Business Report has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. The Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon.
On Nova, it was a flood of biblical proportions right here in the American Northwest.
Imagine the loudest noise you've ever heard, multiply that by 1,000 times.
A cataclysmic wave obliterated everything in its path and left behind a scientific riddle. What caused it? Now geological detectives hunt for answers. Mystery of the mega flood.
Join us tonight at 8 here on OPB.
Wide Angle. This week, Vietnam. A fatal virus has jumped from birds to humans. In Southeast Asia, the first victims are being counted.
This is an incredibly destructive virus. We've had patients who have been well in the morning and by that evening have died.
If this virus spreads quickly between humans, that could launch a global pandemic of H5N1, killer flu. On the next Wide Angle.
Join us tonight at 9 here on OPB. Business Partners, Essential Retirement Guide, and New Horizons Computer Learning Centers have made a contribution to the Program Fund for Excellence. Additional funding has been provided by you, the contributing members of OPB.
She was a literary phenomenon.
Willa Cather.
Next time on American Masters, experience the life and works of writer Willa Cather.
My Antonia. O pioneers, death comes for the Archbishop.
It's Willa Cather. She wanted to be as big as the big guys.
Good Housekeeping magazine named her one of the 12 greatest women in America.
Look for Willa Cather, The Road Is All, on American Masters.
Wednesday night at 8 here on OPB.
On Smart Gardening, we'll plant the seeds of inspiration for a beautiful and bountiful garden. Join us each week as we meet experts all across the nation to find new and creative solutions for your backyard. Wherever your garden grows, we'll help make it a success. Whether you love flowers, trees, vegetables, or lawns, grow more right here on Smart Gardening.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you and by the following. Safe Corporation, preventing workplace injuries and helping Oregon employers manage the cost of workers' compensation insurance. Safe, on the job for Oregon. Willamette University's Atkinson Graduate School of Management, educating students, developing executives, and connecting people who know the business of management.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Tuesday, then a look at where the money's coming from to pay Katrina's many costs. A report on what the storm did to the Gulf shrimping industry. A newsmaker interview with the American-North Korea negotiator Christopher Hill. The latest on Afghanistan's breakthrough parliamentary elections. And words from and about Simon Wiesenthal, the famed Nazi hunter who died today.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
Somewhere in Indiana, a farmer is getting to work. Somewhere in California and Connecticut and everywhere in between, others like him are getting to work. Which is why every morning, Monday through Friday, millions are able to work. The American farmer is essential to the economy, and that's why we work to be essential to him. ADM, resourceful by nature.
The golden years when life was
Wasn't always like this, believe me. I almost lost my shirt when my business hit the wall in 1984. We didn't take a vacation for years. Our financial guy helped us find the way back. But it's been a long road here, and we're not taking anything for granted.
Smith Barney, this is who we are. This is how we earn it.
And by CIT and Pacific Life.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The Florida Keys took a hit from Hurricane Rita today, and the Gulf Coast braced for the worst. The storm grew from a tropical storm into a hurricane early in the day. The eye passed south of the Keys, but winds of 100 miles an hour drove waves over the main highway. Forecasters also expected at least 8 inches of rain. The storm was likely to become a major hurricane tomorrow over the warm waters of the Gulf. It was headed toward landfall by this weekend in Texas or Louisiana. The approach of a new hurricane sparked action along the Gulf Coast today. The island city of Galveston, Texas, declared a voluntary evacuation. A hurricane in September of 1900 killed an estimated 8,000 people in Galveston. This morning, the mayor announced buses would start taking people to shelters farther inland.
People with special needs will go on board first. People with reservations will then be boarded. We do have the buses, but we surely do need to know how many people and who you are who would like to get on those buses. It really will help.
City officials also said they'd allow evacuees to take pets with them on the buses in cages. Elsewhere, officials in Houston announced up to 4,000 evacuees from Hurricane Katrina would be flown to Arkansas. Texas Governor Rick Perry recalled nearly 1,200 National Guard troops helping with recovery from Katrina. And Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco called for people to evacuate the southwestern part of her state. In New Orleans, the mayor said buses will be available to evacuate remaining residents, but many showed no sign of leaving. One property owner in the French Quarter said, "It'll take a gun to my head." President Bush was back on the Gulf Coast today for the 5th time since Katrina hit. He stopped first in Gulfport, Mississippi, and acknowledged complaints about the cleanup.
I did hear from the mayors and the county supervisors, and there was a level of frustration, as there should have been. The mayors tell me, I'm a little cautious about laying it out there, but the mayors tell me there is a plan now in place that is logical and that where people will begin to see concrete results when it comes to removing this debris.
Later, the president visited New Orleans again. Also today, the president named his Homeland Security advisor, Francis Townsend, to review the government's response to Katrina, but leading Democrats again demanded an independent commission be set up. North Korea cast doubt today on a deal to scrap its nuclear weapons program. That deal was announced yesterday after six-nation talks in China. But today, the North Koreans insisted again the United States must first provide it with a civilian nuclear reactor. In Washington, the chief U.S. negotiator played down that statement. Christopher Hill spoke in an interview with the NewsHour.
The North Koreans absolutely know what they signed up to. They know that they signed up to getting rid of all of their weapons and all of their nuclear programs. They signed up to the idea of getting back into the non-proliferation treaty with the safeguards associated with that. And after that, they signed up to the idea that at an appropriate time, we would sit down, we, the other five, would sit down with them and discuss a light water reactor.
Hill said the North Korean statement was inconvenient. Still, he said he expects the next phase of talks to take place as scheduled in November. We'll have that interview in its entirety later in the program. U.S. officials in Iraq announced the deaths of 9 more Americans today. A diplomatic security agent and 3 private guards were killed Monday in Mosul, and 5 U.S. soldiers died in roadside bombings. That pushed the total of U.S. deaths to more than 1,900 since the war began. Nearly 14,500 American troops have been wounded. Also today, Iraqi officials denounced British forces for storming a jail in Basra on Monday. We have a report on that incident from Paul Davies of Independent Television News.
British troops on the streets of Basra today, hours after taking part in a rescue operation that's been both applauded and condemned. These are the two men who benefited most from that operation. British soldiers, almost certainly special forces, filmed by Iraqi television while they were still in captivity. Iraqi police claim they found these weapons and equipment with the Britons when they were arrested, and that before surrendering, the British soldiers shot at least one Iraqi officer. These dramatic pictures show what happened when British forces arrived outside the police station where the two were being held. Their Warrior armoured personnel carriers were attacked by an angry mob. At one point, the gunner tries to escape from his burning vehicle. At this stage, the British commander was still ordering his troops to stay outside the police station while negotiations to free the captured two continued. But later, he explained today, something happened to change his mind.
I became more concerned about the safety of the two soldiers after we received information that they had been handed over to militia elements. As a result, I took the difficult decision to order entry to the Jamiat police station.
The Jamiat police station, where the two undercover soldiers had initially been taken, is in Basra's Baghdad Street. It is a walled compound with a cell block inside. The British troops first secured the surrounding area, then launched their rescue mission. A Warrior armoured personnel carrier broke down the perimeter wall. Witnesses state that police officers were threatened with the armoured vehicle's cannon until they revealed the militia base where the undercover Britons had been taken. The Iraqi authorities saw it all a different way. A barbaric act of vandalism, Basra's governor called it. Many questions remain unanswered. Perhaps the most amazing thing is that the soldiers pictured on fire in these terrifying images survived without serious injury.
Britain has 8,500 troops in Iraq, mostly in the south. Afghan President Karzai today challenged foreign military operations in his country. He said U.S.-led airstrikes on Taliban guerrillas are no longer effective. Instead, he urged coalition forces to focus on militant training camps. His remarks came as workers tallied votes from Sunday's parliamentary elections. It will be several weeks before results are in. We'll have more on the elections later in the program. OPEC agreed today to pump an extra 2 million barrels of oil a day for the last 3 months of the year. The cartel acted after prices spiked more than $4 a barrel yesterday. Today, futures in New York were down more than $1 to settle at $66.23 a barrel. The Federal Reserve raised a key short-term interest rate again today. The federal funds rate went up another quarter point to 3.75% on overnight loans between banks. The Fed said it does not believe the effects of Hurricane Katrina will be long-lasting. It said it's more concerned about keeping inflation in check. On Wall Street today, the interest rate hike sent stocks lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 76 points to close at 10,481. The Nasdaq fell nearly 14 points to close at 2131. Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal died today at his home in Vienna, Austria. He survived Nazi death camps and then spent 50 years tracking down war criminals. His work helped find former SS leader Adolf Eichmann and some 1,100 other Nazis. Simon Wiesenthal was 96 years old, and we'll have more on him and his life at the end of the program. Between now and then, paying for Katrina, shrimp damage, the American perspective on the North Korea nuclear deal, and the Afghan elections. A price tag for Katrina. Kwame Holman begins our look.
President Bush has promised to rebuild the devastated Gulf Coast with one of the costliest reconstruction programs in history, estimated at $200 billion or more. Among the specifics, the president has proposed $2 billion in incentives to bring businesses back to the region, another $2 billion to cover the costs of educating more than 370,000 students displaced by the storm, and $5,000 recovery accounts for each job seeker in the disaster area. Congress already has approved $62 billion, the bulk of it going to FEMA operations. More emergency money is expected to be approved next month. The rising estimates have set off a fierce debate among lawmakers over who will pick up the tab. Today, Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist said several options are on the table.
Offsets, potential across the board spending cuts, looking at legislation we passed in recent weeks, months, and even years as to where we can appropriately cut. Here in New Orleans,
Frist, who led a Senate delegation to the Gulf region last Friday, vowed Congress will give the president the money necessary to pay for the recovery. But fiscal conservatives within his party say other government programs must be slashed or shelved to deal with the sprawling costs of Katrina, noting the federal budget already has been squeezed to pay for the Iraq War.
I also believe that we ought to take a really hard look at delaying implementation of the new prescription drug entitlement. That alone would put $40 billion back on the books that we could apply to Katrina next year.
The president has said the federal government will pay for most of the recovery effort and suggested that spending in other areas of government should be cut.
It's going to mean that we're going to have to make sure we cut unnecessary spending.
Some congressional Democrats agree, but many, such as North Dakota Senator Byron Dorgan, say the savings must not come from programs for the poor and disadvantaged.
But if belt-tightening, as it usually does, means withdrawing health care from poor people and the kinds of things that help or that hurt most, rather, those who are poorest in this country, that is not, in my judgment, advancing America's cause.
Meanwhile, House Majority Leader Tom DeLay said don't expect tax increases to pay for the recovery.
The Gulf Coast region is today without an economy, without jobs or businesses or investment. Raising taxes will not help create any of those things, but will instead guarantee that the region's economic troubles spread to the rest of the country.
Ohio Democrat Dennis Kucinich said wealthy recipients of the Bush administration's tax cuts should help pay the bill for Katrina.
However, I think all Americans would expect that the top 1% of the income earners in this country who receive most of the benefit from the administration's tax cut should have to give up some of their tax cuts in order to relieve the burden on the people in the Gulf Coast. It's only fair.
Another idea congressional leaders discussed today was to set an overall budget ceiling on what the federal government would be allowed to spend on Katrina relief.
Gwen Ifill takes it from there.
So what are the expectations of and the limits to spending on a disaster like Katrina? For 2 points of view, we turn to Pat Toomey, a former Republican member of Congress who is president of the Club for Growth, which supports limited government and low taxes, and Stan Collender, managing director of Financial Dynamics, a consulting firm. He's also a former Democratic staffer for the House and Senate Budget Committees. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Toomey, we heard Senator Frist say today that this is going to be a huge federal expenditure and that we have to face the fact that our children are going to be the ones paying for it. Is that inevitable?
It shouldn't be inevitable. We've got a record-sized federal budget. We've got a record amount of waste in the federal budget. And I think it's really important that we start to offset some of these expenditures. You know, in the past, when we've had natural disasters, now admittedly, this is at a larger scale, but in the past, it was actually routine that we would introduce offsetting reductions in spending for new unanticipated appropriations. I think we should take that approach now more than ever, in part because of the size of our deficits, in part because of the magnitude of this effort. It looks like it's going to be quite large, and we just can't be having this unlimited expenditure, open checkbook by the federal government.
Mr. Collender, last week the president said the Congress and the president passed $62 billion, which the president described as a down payment and what would need to be spent on Katrina. Is there enough in the budget to offset that cost, as Mr. Toomey suggests?
Well, in theory, yes. We've got a budget of $2.6 trillion. You'd think you'd find a few shekels here and there to be able to pay for things. But a good part of that is things like Social Security and Medicare, which Congress and the president have said they're not going to cut. Other entitlements, which are difficult to cut. Interest on the debt, defense, Homeland Security, which is basically untouchable for a variety of other reasons. You get down to basically about $500 billion that's available to be looked at relatively easy. And the key word there is relative, which means we'd have to cut 40% or thereabouts of everything in this what's left category to pay for Katrina. And that's not going to happen. I mean, that would pit one part of the country against another, one constituency against another. You would slow down the aid to Katrina under those circumstances. So whether or not it should happen, it's not going to. The politics just aren't there.
So is that pie in the sky, what you're saying?
I wouldn't give up so quickly. First of all, the expenditures for Katrina are not all going to occur in 1 year. This is going to take time. The rebuilding and the construction, by its nature, takes a number of years. Secondly, I think some of the programs that Stan is suggesting might be unavailable for cuts actually ought to be on the table, including some of the mandatory spending programs. So I think the available pool is a little bit larger than that. And thirdly, I would suggest that there is a very strong and growing sentiment amongst voters, and we see it all the time amongst our own members and candidates for Congress across the country. There's a level of frustration with the total spending in Washington, in a sense that you got to get this under control. And I think if Congress just goes ahead and spends all this money without any kind of offsetting reductions, politicians, members of Congress will pay the price by losing their seat next fall, and that's something that they're not going to want to risk.
Let's talk about what's on the table and what's not on the table. For instance, Senator McCain and others have suggested that the prescription drug Medicare benefit that was passed last year should be cut out entirely or at least rolled back. The White House said no. Should that be on the table or off the table?
I think it should be. I mean, absolutely. I think the entire program was ill-conceived, and certainly delaying it at a minimum would save an awful lot of money. And there are a number of members of Congress, including Mike Pence from the Republican Study Committee and others, who are advocating exactly that. However, when you consider the political capital that the leadership in the House and the Senate and the White House put into getting that passed, I understand that that particular program is probably unlikely.
What about making tax cuts permanent, as the president has insisted he will?
Well, that would qualify in many people's minds as a tax increase, which the entire Republican leadership, the White House, has said there's no way, no how, isn't going to be considered. And besides, making some of those tax cuts permanent can be delayed till a year from now because they're not going to really phase out anytime soon. So that's probably not going to happen. We're not talking about tax increases. No one's talking about tax increases seriously.
And I would just add that neither should we. We have an economy that is facing the unprecedentedly high oil prices. We're getting into a fairly advanced stage in an economic expansion, and now we have a hurricane that's done enormous damage. This is no time to raise taxes and tip the economy into a recession. It certainly wouldn't help in the rebuilding.
What about Medicaid cuts, which have been for $10 billion in Medicaid cuts, which presumably benefit the kinds of people that Katrina needs to help right now? Should they be rolled back?
Medicaid absolutely has to be on the table. There are states in which huge percentages of the population are getting Medicaid benefits. This program has been growing at rates that are absolutely unsustainable. I think everybody on both sides of the aisle ultimately understands that. This would be a good time to take another look at that program.
Highway spending, energy spending, a lot of people say there's a lot of pork in that.
Well, and there may be a lot of pork, but that bill just passed. It passed overwhelmingly in both houses. The president signed it. And you know what? Even if they cut back some of what some people might call pork, but other people would call a very important sacred cow for their districts and states, the level of savings would have been relatively small. The time to stop that bill from happening, that spending from occurring, was when it was first being considered earlier in the year.
So we've been talking for a few minutes here about options, none of which seem to be realistic options. How do you pay for Katrina?
Well, again, we should revisit this transportation bill. I mean, in that bill, there's over $250 million to build a bridge in Alaska that goes to an island with 50 people on it. You could buy a Learjet for every one of those people instead of building that bridge. I mean, there's unbelievable amounts of waste there. The president, in his 06 budget proposal, proposed $17 billion in elimination and consolidations of existing programs because he came out and said, these programs are redundant and not effective.
Do you think the president is likely to veto any bill that includes those spending?
I don't think that will necessarily be the criteria for a veto, but I certainly hope if the spending is not offset that the president would be willing to veto things.
But the answer to your question is, how are we going to pay for this if we're not willing to increase taxes or cut spending? Very simple. We're going to borrow it. The deficit's going to go up. $450 billion in 2006 is not an unreasonable number. It could even be a little bit higher depending upon how fast the spending actually occurs. So, just as Senator Frisch said, we're all going to be paying for this for quite some time as we continue to pay the interest on the national debt over a period of 10, 20, or 30 years.
Is that a temporary thing?
Actually not. A lot of this spending that's going to happen on Katrina will be one-time in nature, some of the emergency assistance, some of the cleanup, but some of the additional spending, like keeping FEMA, increasing FEMA, providing more dollars for the Coast Guard, more dollars for the Pentagon so we can respond in emergencies, more money for state aid and some industry bailouts. That's not going to go away anytime soon, and what we're going to see is a deficit eventually that's lower than where it's going, but never getting back to the levels that, or not getting back to the levels anytime soon
So the
that we saw
president's,
before.
excuse me, the president's goal of having the deficit in 5 years, is that still going to happen?
It depends what you mean by the word half.
I don't understand.
Well, are we talking about it as a percentage of the economy? Are we talking about it in nominal terms? Are we talking about it from a theoretical level the White House was using of $512 billion? Or are we going to do what the White House said recently, which is we're talking about cutting the deficit in half, but not including the costs of Iraq or Katrina or some of the other one-time elements that we have to spend money on?
Is that acceptable?
I don't think so. I think we need to go after the offsets. You know, at some point, the role of the federal government ought to be to make some tough decisions and not just spend everything on every program that comes along and every conceivable need. There's a big danger that this kind of very, very sweeping and broad federal approach to Katrina becomes a permanent quasi-governmental entity that's out there just to write huge checks every time there's any kind of natural disaster. That not only is it an enormous expense, but there's a moral hazard to that. It takes away the incentive to have insurance and other prudent sort of safety measures. I think this is a dangerous road we could be going down.
Is the economy strong enough to withstand the kinds of tests and the kind of pressure that Katrina is about to put on it?
Well, short term, the answer is absolutely. I mean, first of all, even if we increase the deficit by $200 billion in 1 year, which is an overstatement, but that's the total cost of Katrina, we're talking about an economy of $11.5 or $12 trillion. And in the short term, we can certainly, absorb that, handle that, borrow it without creating big pressure on interest rates, a variety of other things. The problem comes in when you add in the cost of energy, when you talk about the long-term impact on interest rates. That's when the real danger is going to come.
I think the economy is very, very strong. It's actually amazingly strong across such a wide range of criteria. I think it's largely due to the tax cuts that were put in place in 2003, which is why it's so important that we make them permanent so that we sustain this growth. But long term, we can't allow the government's share of our economic output to keep growing, because that allocation of resources is always suboptimal at best, and that diminishes our ability to grow a more prosperous economy.
A fight that's just beginning. Pat Toomey, Stan Collender, thank you both very much.
Thanks for having me.
Now a look at the impact Hurricane Katrina had on one important Louisiana industry. Spencer Michaels has our story.
In Liberty Bayou, just off Lake Pontchartrain, Gerald Brinning agreed to fire up his shrimp boat, the Tufu, and show us the devastation suffered by the Louisiana fishing industry, an industry that brings in $2.7 billion a year. But in the harbor, where boats lay tossed every which way from the storm, Brinning's boat, a Katrina survivor, started smoking as debris from the filthy water got sucked into the engine. So we returned to port.
How serious for your friends and the people you see is all of this?
Very seriously. They're devastated. That's what most of them make all their living on. And most of them lost all their boats from the hurricane.
So you've been talking to some of these people. What are they going to do? What are you going to do?
They don't know. But right now they're trying to find their boats, and they lost their homes and everything. Me, I'm going to lease my boat out and start pulling boats out of the water and make it that way.
We're still fueling, and I've got a couple of ropes to cut, and we will be ready.
Boat owners try to help each other out. So houseboat captain and ballroom dancing teacher Susan Jiwa tried to take us into the bayous to inspect the damage.
I've got no gear. I've got no friggin' gear.
But she couldn't get her boat to shift gears.
There's so much debris and animals and trash in the water that it gets up into the propellers and up into the gears, and there's nothing you can do about it.
The dirty water has been crippling the whole fishing industry near New Orleans, which supplies a quarter of all U.S. seafood, and had been a source of culinary pride for the state.
Well, you have feces in the water, you have just raw sewage.
So you don't want to eat shrimp from this water?
I don't want to eat any seafood from these waters for a very long time, and nobody will. And that's sad, because Louisiana has the best seafood in the world.
Since the boats wouldn't work, Brinning decided to drive us through the damaged streets of Slidell to the narrow lanes along Salt Bayou. On the way, a sign of what lay ahead. A seafood store closed. The hurricane losses in shrimp sales alone are estimated at $81 million. This is where many of the shrimpers lived and kept their boats. Crab traps littered the shore, wrecked and empty, along with shrimp nets and parts of boats. A few former shrimpers gathered near the site of a seafood processing plant to attempt some cleanup. Frank Sauter and Ray Stewart were commercial shrimpers, and now both are without jobs and without homes.
They had freezers on both sides of the crab plant there.
Oh, yeah,
it's all
the whole
gone.
crab
There's nothing but filings left.
And they would bring them to this place here, which is just scrap metal now, and they would process it, steam them, and people would come in and pick them. I mean, this guy had about 80 to 100 people working for him around the clock.
The shrimp industry is essentially wiped out for at least a year, maybe more. Butch Joffrion has been shrimping for 42 years. He says the local industry was on the way out anyway, unable to compete with cheap Asian shrimp, and that the hurricane may have just pushed it over the edge. Employment had dropped 50% in the last 15 years.
There's no future for shrimping in the state of Louisiana. With the federal regulations, with the imports, and with the high fuel prices, anybody raising a family, buying an automobile, paying a mortgage, sending kids to school, they ain't gonna make it.
His sister-in-law, Irene Roach, whose father was a fisherman, disagrees.
There's a big difference in taking seafood here and then importing it. I mean, the freshness, it's not treated with chemicals, you know, to preserve it, to get it over here. There's a world of difference in the taste.
This is the American Red Cross. We have food, drink, and water.
Nearby, the Red Cross was cruising through the countryside, visiting encampments of poor, sometimes bewildered residents who rode out the storm or came back to former homes. Just across the bayou, residents led us to a pile of sticks and cars and mud. It was Apple Pie Ridge, a cheery name for a hamlet that has been wiped off the face of the earth. Slidell, a community of 90,000, formerly within commuting distance of New Orleans, but no longer since a bridge was wrecked, has lost many of its homes, its crucial fishing industry, and the rural charm that attracted people to this unique corner of the country.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, the U.S. negotiator with North Korea, the Afghan elections, and the many works of Simon Wiesenthal. The North Korea deal. Ray Suarez has our story.
Yesterday, there was a surprise agreement on curbing North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Assistant Secretary of State Christopher Hill is the chief U.S. negotiator in the talks among North Korea, China, Japan, Russia, and South Korea. He's just back from the Beijing meeting and the signing of the agreement. Assistant Secretary, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, it seems like the ink was hardly dry on the agreement when North Korea was already rhetorically bailing out of it.
Well, the North Koreans have a way of making statements out of Pyongyang. This one was not helpful, certainly inconvenient, but we're very much focused on moving ahead with the process, and I think so are the other participants. So, as inconvenient and unpleasant as the statement was, we are assuming we are going forward on this.
Well, inconvenient, unpleasant, but at what point do you take it seriously enough to think that they're disavowing the agreement?
Well, when I left Beijing just yesterday, I shook hands with the North Korean representative, and he said, well, we have a lot of work to do, and I said, yes, we do, and look forward to doing just that. So the North Koreans absolutely know what they signed up to. They know that they signed up to getting rid of all of their weapons and all of their nuclear programs. They signed up to the idea of getting back into the non-proliferation treaty with the safeguards associated with that. And after that, they signed up to the idea that at an appropriate time, we would sit down, we, the other five, would sit down with them and discuss a light water reactor.
Well, I think that's the crux of the disagreement, at least from the North Koreans' statement. They would like to give up whatever they've got, their enrichment program, their stockpiles, in return for the light water reactor, but get the reactor first.
Well, we have made very clear to them, and they very well know, they know it from private discussions with all the participants, They know it from the agreement, which speaks about an appropriate time, and they know it from the plenary statements of the participants that they have to get out of this nuclear business first. So it's a little hard for them to swallow. I mean, they've been up to this for some 2.5 decades now, and they're just going to have to get used to it, and I'm sure they will, and I'm sure we'll meet as we plan to meet in early November and move on to the next phase.
This comes from the official North Korean news agency. The U.S. should not even dream of the issue of North Korea's dismantlement of its nuclear deterrent before providing light water reactors. This is our just and consistent stand, as solid as a deeply rooted rock. Doesn't sound like they think the same thing that you just said.
I have no doubt that it's as solid as a deeply rooted rock on the day they said it.
Is there a split inside the 6 parties over the critical nature of that phasing, whether they get the reactors first and then give up, or the
There's
other
no
way around?
split at all, and I would draw your attention to another part of the agreement, which has South Korea providing conventional power to the tune of 2,000 megawatts. That's precisely the amount of power that was envisioned in the agreement in the 1990s when we spoke about, or when they spoke about light water reactors. So the amount of power that was to be supplied by light water reactors in the 1990 agreement is being supplied by the South Koreans by conventional power.
Let's talk a little bit about the breakthrough that allowed this agreement to go forward. Up until just hours before this joint draft was signed, several of the parties were saying the talks were on the verge of falling apart.
Well, these are tough talks, and I don't know if one can speak about a breakthrough. It's more sort of 3 yards in a cloud of dust. There are no long passes in this. You just sort of plow your way down the field. And we knew we were getting close, and we knew we were getting closer and closer. And the question was whether in that last day we could solve the remaining differences. And it wasn't easy, but we were able to do it.
What was the People's Republic of China's role in bringing you to a document all 6 could sign?
I think China did a very good job, and I think this entire 6-party process has helped us work better with the Chinese, which is very important because that is a country that's going to be around, and we're going to have to figure out ways to cooperate with them. China was a full participant. They had their own national positions on things, but they also act as a sort of secretariat, and they were the ones who put together these drafts. There are 4 drafts, really 4.5 drafts, and then they tried to push the sides to agree to them. The light water reactor issue came up late, and it was clearly an issue that the North Koreans were going to make a stand on. They said they have to have light water reactor in the agreement. So we worked very hard with the Chinese to come up with language in the agreement that allowed us to go forward with that.
Heading into the talks, the conventional wisdom was that you needed the Chinese in there in order to pull the North Koreans along. But is the converse also true? Were they a bridge between the North Koreans and the American side, putting demands to the American side as well?
Well, certainly the Chinese have some influence with the North Koreans, and certainly they have more than we do. I mean, they have a lot of economic ties, political ties, etc. But we found it was also useful to deal directly with the North Korean side. So we did both. We went through the Chinese, and we also dealt directly, and sometimes we went through the South Koreans and the Russians, who also have some influence with the North Koreans. So I think the Chinese played an important role in that regard, but we had other ways of getting to the North Koreans.
Were there face-to-face talks between American delegates and the North Koreans that were bilateral?
Within the context of the 6-party talks, absolutely. We were all in this large guest house, as it's called. It's actually a conference center. You'd come in the morning, you'd get your cup of coffee. Usually you'd have a bilateral with the Chinese pretty early on. We'd have a 6-party meeting where we'd all sit around and we'd discuss agenda items, and then we'd go into bilaterals. We had bilaterals with the South Korean delegation, bilaterals with the Russians, and bilaterals with the North Koreans, to be sure.
Now, that doesn't violate the administration's real misgivings about speaking directly to the North Koreans?
I think what we were concerned about was that we needed to have other players involved in this. This is not a U.S. bilateral issue. This is an issue that involves many other countries, especially the neighbors of North Korea. So when North Korea sits down and reaches an agreement in the 6-party talks, they're reaching an agreement with us, but they're also reaching an agreement with all of their neighbors. That has real importance. That has importance in Asia. Indeed, that has importance everywhere. So that is why we wanted to make sure this didn't turn into a bilateral process.
Is your boss, the Secretary of State, still hearing very strongly disagreeing and diverse advice on what to do about North Korea?
Well, you'll have to ask Dr. Rice what she's hearing, but I can tell you that I was in very close contact with Dr. Rice. She was very, very intimately involved with the entire process, and it was a very important link for me.
Did this represent at least an evolution in the United States' manner of handling North Korea from the first Bush administration?
Well, I think what we have stressed all along is the idea there should be a multilateral process. This is not a bilateral problem. And efforts in the past to deal with this bilaterally have often caused problems because the North Koreans backed away from an agreement with us. It's a little more difficult for the North Koreans to back away from an agreement not only with us, but with all of their neighbors. And, you know, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors, and they have to think very clearly about that.
Assistant Secretary of State Christopher Hill, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, politics in the still new democracy of Afghanistan. It will be weeks before the results are known from Sunday's parliamentary elections, but there was a 50% turnout, and the voting went smoothly. We have a report from Alex Thompson of Independent Television News.
From the battle to the ballot. 4 years after the Northern Alliance soldiers swept out of the Salang and Panjshir valleys to overthrow the Taliban, Afghans voted in a peaceful, organized and unarmed fashion. I've had a hard life, said Abdul Malik Shah. My beard's white, my teeth have gone, but I walked over the mountains to vote. His index finger stained indelibly to make sure he voted only once. Well, I'm very, very happy. And God is very happy too. You know, I walked all the way down the mountain at 5 a.m. this morning with my dodgy leg. Slowly, slowly, but full of happiness. Women, of course, vote separately in an election where a quarter of the 249 seats in the new parliament will be reserved for women. We asked one, Aziza, why voting matters.
I've come here to vote so Afghanistan can be peaceful, to stop the bloodshed for a better future.
Many talk of a political peace underpinning the physical regeneration and stability that you see here. Yesterday's hulks of war in the valley, today's election poster display. New bridges for this famous highway linking northern to central Afghanistan. The Salang Pass tunnel reopened to traffic after years of being a rubble-filled silence. By morning, Noorara had already voted and somehow got back to work 10,000 feet up the mountain at the tunnel. He reckoned everyone here would simply vote for the two men with religious and military power in the valley, just what many in the international election observers fear most about this poll. But just down from the pass, a big surprise. These men keep the road clear of snow and rock falls. It's a tough male world away from the wives and the children. But to a man, they'd voted for a woman, Samir Sadat. They said all men want from politics is power and money, and they've screwed this whole country up. Hamidullah, the foreman, explained.
She's an independent candidate. She's the head of education in this province. She's a good woman. That's why I voted for her.
Where the valley widens onto the Shamali plain, the American-backed Northern Alliance made their advance on Kabul 4 years back.
Thank you.
Today, along a totally refurbished highway, Charikar is a more peaceful and more prosperous town. No queues here, but a steady trickle of voters showing their ID, dipping their fingers into that ink, taking the ballot and making their choice for both regional and national assemblies. But what of the turnout? Out of town and in Kabul, most polling stations were distinctly quiet. Observers say turnout's nothing like the presidential election about a year ago. Organisers say that's misleading because this time there are far more polling stations. Whatever the case, what matters now is what an Afghan parliament actually delivers. One poll observer said people are disillusioned already by broken promises, and she warned,
if the MPs don't work for the people's needs and the country's future, then people really will be disillusioned with the government and parliament. The people's needs are so great.
There must be change. A parliament must deliver. In Kabul, local cricket teams have been competing, each taking an international side. So we caught up here with England versus India. Being from Pakistan, the Taliban actually tolerated cricket, so this isn't a sign of change, which is fine with the voters, of course, but they certainly want their new parliament to deliver a radically altered country.
Official results are expected in late October. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld applauded the Afghans today for turning out to vote. An al-Qaeda tape released today called the elections a farce. And finally tonight, the legacy of Simon Wiesenthal and his one-man pursuit of Nazi war criminals. We start with a report from Jonathan Miller of Independent Television News.
He walked a lonely road. His task overwhelming, his cause had few friends. But Simon Wiesenthal, Holocaust survivor turned self-styled Nazi hunter, detective and prosecutor rolled into one, was perhaps the first to understand that never again is a vacuous phrase without justice.
He has become more than a symbol. He was the main active person who dedicated his whole life pursuing those German Nazi war criminals and bringing up the notion that a bit of justice should be done.
And a bit of justice is what Simon Wiesenthal got. The man they call the conscience of the Holocaust helped convict 1,100 Nazis.
This is very sad news because for me, Simon Wiesenthal is one of the greats. He tried to seek justice and not just take revenge.
Born the son of a Jewish businessman in Ukraine, Simon Wiesenthal's life was scarred by tragedy and loss. His father died in the First World War, his stepfather in the Second. His mother sent to a concentration camp in 1942, the year the Nazis implemented their final solution to what they called the Jewish problem. Within months, Simon Wiesenthal and his wife were to lose 89 members of their immediate families. Wiesenthal himself survived 3 death camps. In one, he was among just 34 inmates of an original 150,000 to make it out alive. On liberation, he weighed under 7 stone. For the next 6 decades, from a nondescript office in Vienna, Wiesenthal made sure the Nazi genocidal killers would not sleep easy in their beds. His big catch, Adolf Eichmann, who ran the Gestapo's Jewish department, tracked down in Argentina, kidnapped by Mossad and secreted back to Israel, found guilty of mass murder and executed in 1961. During the Cold War, the world lost interest in hunting Nazis, but Wiesenthal went on. His undercover work brought scores of top SS men to the dock, including the officer who caught Anne Frank, the teenage diarist. His big regret? Not catching death camp doctor Josef Mengele.
I missed him 5 times.
The Third Reich's angel of death, whom Wiesenthal said killed 400,000 Jews, died in Brazil, still a fugitive from justice. Simon Wiesenthal repeatedly warned the world that history repeats itself.
This is important, that our children and grandchildren, and not only they, but also the new generation, the young generation from many nations, for their benefit, should learn from our tragedy.
In a 1990 NewsHour interview with Robert McNeil, Wiesenthal discussed his relentless search for Nazi war criminals. Here's an excerpt.
Are there many perpetrators of the Holocaust, criminals, still alive and at large today?
I think thousands.
Thousands.
Germans, Austrians, and voluntary collaborators of Nazis in different countries of the world. But it's going everything to a biological end. Criminals die, witnesses die, I will die. But how long people from these two generations are alive, the matter must remain an open matter and as a warning for the future. That these people, they commit crimes, will never rest. This is the warning. Because...
This is the warning?
Yes, because it's possible that the murderers of tomorrow are born today. They should know that they will never rest, like these murderers are not resting. And they are sleepless nights. They don't know if we know them or not know them, but they believe that we know them. This is a part of the sentence.
A part of the sentence is to give them sleepless nights, because you'll never catch all of them before they die.
Absolutely.
Margaret Warner has more.
And joining us to talk about Simon Wiesenthal, the man, and his broader legacy is Michael Berenbaum, a Holocaust scholar who helped create the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. He's now an adjunct professor at the University of Judaism in Los Angeles. And Mr. Berenbaum, welcome. There were millions of European Jews whose families were killed in the Holocaust, yet none pursued the Nazis after the war with such determination as Simon Wiesenthal. I know you knew him. What drove him to do this?
Simon Wiesenthal was consumed by a sense that these people had to be brought to justice and that the world had to achieve that modicum of justice that was available to it in the aftermath of the destruction. His word always was justice, not vengeance, and that is that in the early days especially, there were other ways of dealing with war criminals, and he felt that the world must come to terms with this event by achieving a modicum of justice. And he saw that as essential not only to our obligation to the past, but to how we create our future together.
Now, how did this one man, operating alone, without a government essentially behind him, operating him out of that little office we saw video of in this piece, manage to track down clever former Nazi officials everywhere from Argentina to Queens, New York? How did he do it? How did he operate?
Well, he operated by tenacity. Number one, he was stubborn and he was determined, and his determination fueled him. Number two, he operated on the margins with people who had reasons to inform him. Number one, there were victims who bumped into and indeed surprisingly lived among the perpetrators. Remember, the United States received a whole range of people in 1948 under the provisions of the new law of immigration that was passed in 1948. Among them were Holocaust survivors, but also among them were a series of people some of whom were perpetrators. He then worked with detectives, he worked with organizations that tracked it, he worked with governments, and he also followed up and followed through on the rumor mill. There were anti-Nazis throughout Germany who wanted to score points. There were even Nazis who wanted to get even with former Nazis whom they felt were not giving them a square deal. He lived in the world of rumor, he lived in the world of innuendo, and he also lived in a world in which research was done and card files were kept in order to find out who these people were and where they were. One of the stories he was fond of telling was the fact that he looked at the marriage record of Nazi war criminals' widows, and he very often found that they were marrying a man who was not supposed to be their late husband and who in fact was their late husband. His great achievement on Eichmann was not allowing Eichmann to be declared dead and consequently keeping the search for Eichmann open.
Did he ever talk to you? I mean, here was a man who was an architect. He could have gone back to being an architect. Did he ever talk to you on a personal level about why he was doing this?
He told a wonderful story that took place in 1946 or 47. He went to a castle, but it wasn't, the castle was serving as a warehouse of books. They were told that there were a whole range of Jewish material possessions there of books that would go in a library. He went with a rabbi, and the rabbi picked up a prayer book, and the prayer book had two sentences in it that never left him. The first was, whoever picks up this prayer book, contact my brother. And secondly, remember what these killers did to us. It probably were the words of the book of Deuteronomy. Remember what Amalek did to you in the desert. Remember the killers. The rabbi looked at him and said, this book is intended for you. It was his sister's prayer book. And Simon Wiesenthal said that when his days on earth ended, he wanted to be able to meet his death and say that he remembered the killers because he stood in solidarity always with their victims.
And finally, before we go, it said that he helped at least hunt down 1,100 Nazi war criminals. Is that the mark of his effectiveness, or do you think it's broader than that in terms of his legacy?
That's one of the marks of his effectiveness. The real mark of his effectiveness is found in the world today, which is that he believed in justice. He believed that justice must be served. He believed that in the aftermath of destruction, we have to recreate that modicum of justice that is available to us. That led to the idea that other nations under other circumstances bring their criminals to justice. It's the reason we have a Slobodan Milosevic standing trial. It's the reason the people who were perpetrators in Rwanda are being brought to justice. It's probably indirectly the reason why the Iraqi people will bring Saddam Hussein to justice. Not that these events compare to the Holocaust, but the desire to recreate and reestablish justice in the aftermath of destruction is part of the ways in which societies restore themselves. That will be his legacy, not to the past, but to our collective future.
Michael Berenbaum, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
Again, the other major developments of this day, Hurricane Rita hit the Florida Keys and moved into the Gulf. Forecasters said it would grow into a major storm tomorrow. North Korea demanded civilian nuclear reactors before dismantling its nuclear weapons program.
Comforts like air conditioning or for emergency backup. Lightweight and quiet, Honda's got a generator that's right for you. See the CU 2000? Two of them provided enough power to film this entire commercial. Honda, the power of choice. Call us for the dealer nearest you or shop online now at honda.com. We're moving now. You know we're feeling right. You know we're moving now. Na 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 na. We're moving now. You know we're feeling right. You know we're moving now. Na 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 na. ODS, Medical and Dental Plans.
Escalade, EXT, and the larger ESV. Seeing is believing. Cadillac, breakthrough.
The Cadillac employee discount, available on all 2005 and 2006 Escalade models. Visit your local Cadillac dealer.
A reminder to be sure to start your day with K2 News This Morning. Carl Click, now part of the team, along with Helen Raptis and Julia Radlick from 5 to 7 in the morning. That is Carl in the middle. And finally tonight, a Washington couple's newborn has set a new record at a hospital in Bellevue. Their bouncing baby, why do they call him a bouncing baby boy? Did you ever wonder that?
I've always wondered that.
Yes.
They don't bounce.
Well, apparently not. Was born tipping the scales at 13 pounds, 8 ounces. That's the biggest baby ever born at Overlake Hospital. This couple's no stranger to large babies. Their last child weighed 12 pounds, and now Sean Tanberg and Angela Perry have their biggest yet.
I kind of thought maybe, and they kept asking if there's twins, and the doctor kept saying, no, there's just one in there, and she wasn't gaining any more weight.
It's going to be a large carry, so hopefully it'll fit in his car seat.
Cody is still in the ICU, mainly due to minor complications from his birth, but doctors say he'll be able to go home in a few days. And Ron Carlson, who's had a few babies, says that it's bouncing because you bounce it on your lap. Is that the deal?
That's my guess. The baby, you wouldn't want to bounce the baby.
I understand that. Thanks for helping me out a lot, Ron. See you tomorrow, folks. Thanks a lot for watching.
At TNC Chevy, it's our used car extravaganza. Due to EP pricing, there's a huge inventory of used cars at TNC Chevy. Now save when the Chevy Impalas are starting as low as $14,988. It's only at TNC Chevrolet in Milwaukee. Drive home happy.
Depression affects people in all walks of life. It robs men, women, young, old, rich, and poor of a happy life, steals the joy from relationships, drains your energy, keeps you from sleeping, and floods your mind with sadness, hopelessness, and fatigue. If the burden of depression is dragging you down, there are options. You may qualify for an investigational medication research study provided at no cost to you. Depression is a lonely place. Call Summit Research Network at 503-228-CARE.
Fast, aggressive, relentless. Fire has no equal. Or does it? The 300 horsepower Lexus GS. See Lexus of Portland.
Well, I can't stop loving you. I said I made up my mind to live in me.
Love your car? Now you can love your car insurance too. Introducing Allstate Your Choice Auto Insurance with new car replacement. If your new baby gets totaled, you'll get more than depreciated value. You can get a brand new car. Allstate Your Choice Auto Insurance. Are you in good hands?
At TNC Chevy, it's our used car extravaganza. Due to the success of employee pricing, TNC has a huge selection of pre-owned vehicles. Now save when the Trailblazers are only $19,988. It's only at TNC Chevrolet in Milwaukee. Drive home happy. Timeless Rock 105.9, The River.